go there. So don't look at that for a moment. The fossil fuel, carbon dioxide that we put into the atmosphere, we understand its ultimate fate. It will dissolve in surface waters. Those surface waters will circulate or mix into the deep ocean, carrying that carbon dioxide into the deep ocean. Once in the deep ocean, it'll react with calcium carbonate on the deep sea floor. And on a longer time scale, weathering feedbacks will increase rock weathering on land, will add additional alkalinity to the ocean. And these processes will eventually remove the fossil fuel CO2 that we put into the atmosphere. The problem is time scale. This happens too slowly. These processes happen too slowly. But you can see from them that things like ocean alkalinity enhancement, these are essentially inspired by these natural mechanisms for carbon uptake that are unavoidable. I have not mentioned at all here the role of ocean biology in the anthropogenic CO2 uptake, and that's because naturally there really is no role for natural ocean biological productivity. But we can imagine using, you can't see that, using open ocean seaweed mariculture for this purpose. So I want to explain to you briefly why it is that ocean biological productivity is not playing a role naturally in CO2 uptake into the ocean, and how seaweeds could potentially change this. And that brought up Brian von Herzen. So I want to be clear, I'm not the person who's innovating in this prospective space of growing open ocean seaweeds. Brian von Herzen of the Climate Foundation is doing this, other groups are doing this, and a number of collaborators and I are trying to undertake scientific investigation of how these platforms operate and how they affect carbon and nutrient cycling. So the region I'm focusing on here, the reason we're talking about is the subtropical gyres of the open ocean, these darkest blue regions on this plot, vast areas of the ocean of very low productivity that are not hosts to significant fisheries and don't have many other competing uses from humans other than really shipping. If we go to the open ocean and investigate the carbon fluxes that are going on there, we have, this is unfortunate, but phytoplankton, you can't see the pointer, phytoplankton growing, taking up carbon dioxide and photosynthetic carbon fixation, adding organic matter to upper ocean ecosystems on the left there, that eventually leading to organic matter export by sinking into the deep ocean, which carries organic carbon to the interior. That carbon is regenerated to CO2 in the deep ocean, but now that CO2 is out of the surface ocean, sequestered in the ocean interior. And so we've effectively taken CO2 from the surface ocean and pumped it into the deep ocean. And this process lowers atmospheric CO2. It has lowered it in the past. It continues to have worked to lower it today. So part of the reason CO2 concentrations were 280 parts per million in the pre-industrial atmosphere had to do with the role of this process. And this activity of the ocean to sequester CO2 in the deep ocean, to effectively pump it out of the surface ocean and atmosphere, sequestered in the deep, is known as the biological carbon pump. Okay. Now, phytoplankton in the surface ocean, they require nutrients, nitrogen and phosphorus in particular. Here I'm just showing nitrogen. For every 7 carbons fixed, 1 nitrogen is required. And in the subtropical surface ocean, essentially all of that nitrogen, that nitrate that you see over there in the blue, that's consumed. And so phytoplankton rely on nutrients that are being upwelled from below, as you can see there on the right. Maybe the pointer will come back there. You can almost see it. Okay. And because of this complete consumption at the surface, this system is self-limited. For a given carbon to nitrogen ratio of the organic matter that's being produced and the nutrient reservoir in the ocean, that sets the strength of the biological pump. Now, to be clear, this system is at this point operating just as a closed cycle, right? So you might imagine, for example, that if you were to drive enhanced upwelling, in fact, people have talked about artificial upwelling as a mechanism for drawing down CO2. That's a non-starter. And the reason for that is, you're supplying more nutrients, you can drive more carbon fixation and downward flux of organic matter, but that is necessarily linked to the venting of CO2 that was previously sequestered by the biological pump. So that gives you in itself nothing. So how do we change this picture? Well, seaweeds provide an opportunity for this. Seaweeds grown on an open ocean platform, their carbon to nitrogen ratio is distinct from phytoplankton. They have a much higher carbon to nitrogen ratio. And so if you imagine having seaweeds growing in the open ocean, this leads to a downward flux of carbon and nitrogen with a much higher ratio, which pushes the CO2 storage to a higher level. And this is balanced by CO2 incoming to the atmosphere into the surface ocean. So this provides a mechanism for extracting CO2 from the ocean. Now, seaweed are not going to grow abundantly in the open ocean on a platform because of the nutrient impoverishment. So you need to have a mechanism of nutrient supply. Artificial upwelling is one approach, but it's a very inefficient one. An alternative that seaweeds provide is if you lower the seaweed platform down, for example, at night, seaweeds can undertake luxury nutrient uptake without photosynthesis. Then when they're brought up to the surface in the day, they photosynthesize and draw down CO2. And so you're able to drive this seaweed-driven and human-driven enhancement of the ocean's biological carbon pump. Okay, that's the basic idea here. Don't look at this. So these are a whole bunch of results from an 18-box ocean model of 1 petagram of carbon per year export, trying to address both the amount of CO2 drawdown that it'll cause, as well as a number of ocean environmental changes that will result in comparing seaweed and depth cycling to other imagined CDR approaches, such as iron fertilization in the subantarctic zone of the Southern Ocean. Don't look at this any more than just what I said. I want to just focus on one simulation here that's taking us through time. And what the simulation we're conducting here is at a hypothetical 2030. We start emitting CO2 into the atmosphere from fossil fuels at 9 petagrams of carbon per year, and then stop at 2100. And that's what's shown in the dark, in the solid purple line. And then in the dash is the addition of a seaweed carbon flux of 1 petagram of carbon per year. And not surprisingly, it reduces the CO2 rise by, yes, 1/9. But that's actually actually a better ratio than you get with other approaches like subantarctic zone, iron fertilization, and other CDR approaches that have been suggested involving ocean biology. And the key point to make here is that, in effect, if you're stopping both the anthropogenic CO2 emissions and the seaweed activity at 2100, what you'll then see is that these two curves into the future, this is the natural CO2 uptake by the ocean into the deep ocean that's drawing CO2 down, but the two scenarios will merge because you're essentially allowing that extra CO2 that you sequestered by seaweeds now to escape back to the atmosphere. So in net, what you're doing with this seaweed, this seaweed activity is you're accelerating the rate at which anthropogenic CO2 can make its way into the deep ocean. Okay, thank you very much.